Hi, this is Mark Wright, Chair of the House Republican Delegation in Louisiana. I'm really happy today to come interview our Chair of Insurance in the House, one of my favorite reps, Gabe Firment. He's from Pollock. I think I pronounced that
That's
correctly.
right.
District 22. He's been a big part of what we've been doing this session. Some of the bills that we've tried to work on related to insurance reform have been complicated. And so that's one of the reasons why we brought him in here to talk about what's gone through, what's not, and what we can expect perhaps at the end of session. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Mark.
So to get, why don't we start just a little overview of where we are and how you see things, and then we can pick apart when you're
Sure. No, I think, early on we determined just by listening to our constituents that insurance was probably the number one issue. We had the crime special session, we had redistricting special session, but just hearing from our constituents, insurance is without a doubt the number one issue. So I think it's been a priority for the delegation. Um, and so far, we've been very successful, especially when it comes to passing property insurance reforms. I'd say the jury's still out on the auto reforms, which is another very important piece of the whole uh, picture when it comes to, let's face it, we're in a crisis mode when it comes to the availability and affordability of insurance. It's been that way for many years with auto rates, but after the hurricanes in 2020 and 2021, we began to really have serious issues on the property side as well. So it's something that Commissioner Temple has um, worked really hard. He put together a package of bills, and we've had some success in getting those passed so far.
Yeah, I agree. I've been pleasantly pleased, let's just say, about what's gone through, and obviously we've still got 10 days here in the session to perhaps get some other bills through. You and I both live north of I-10, I'm I-12, so we are a little insulated from some of the coastal insurance issues, but nevertheless, as you mentioned, it's certainly a problem in my area, your area, the whole state. Cost of insurance has been unbelievable. Perhaps the biggest part has been, the hurricanes and how it affects
Right.
the coast. And, I would appreciate you mentioning something I learned as was trying to prepare for this is, Florida, for example, very prominent, wealthy state compared to most of the South. They've had issues with this, and as I understand it, part of the concern it has to do with premium for reinsurance and
Right.
pricing in that cost. Can you talk a little about the built-in part of hurricanes and coasts?
Sure. Well, so obviously, the fact that we were struck by so many devastating hurricanes in such a short period of time, that's a big part of it. We can't control that. We can't control the weather, but there are things we can control. And when you look at the regulatory environment, when you look at the legal environment, we're outliers in many areas, especially when it comes to other states around us with similar risk exposures, hurricanes, tornadoes, convective storms, things like that. So really that's what we've done on the property side is identify areas where we're outliers and remedy that. And I mean I can touch on some of those bills, but reinsurance, which you mentioned, is a huge part of it. So reinsurance is essentially insurance for insurance companies, and the reinsurance market is a global market. So we're not just competing against other states in the deep south, we're competing for reinsurance with the entire world, really. And we have not been an attractive place to do business. I mean, it's very costly. And um, Commissioner Temple, I know, has communicated with the reinsurers. He made a trip to London where a lot of the reinsurance brokers are based. And this package of bills that have been passed have been identified by the reinsurance companies as critical to bring stability to our insurance market.
And I don't want to stay too long on the reinsurance part, but my understanding is that, at least what I read about Florida, as I mentioned, a wealthy state, unlike Louisiana, we don't have the kind of money, resources they have. they've struggled with some of the reinsurance issues, but it's almost what's like 60% of premiums are tied to reinsurance.
Yes,
So it's a
it
big
can
part,
be
right?
60% plus, and so just a huge factor in bringing stability to the market. And again, I think we've already had 4 bills signed by the governor on the property reform package, and we're already hearing very positive things out of the reinsurance market.
No, I mean, I think you've been here a term. I was here a couple of years before you, but not much longer, quite frankly. And I know when I came in that this was an issue with a lot of groups about how do we address this. So why don't we move past that reinsurance and talk a little bit about the business environment? Because I think people forget insurance is a business, it's
Right.
a service, you're paying for it, and there's certain things that I would argue, I'm sure you would argue, most Republicans would agree, you can't force a price on insurance.
Right.
You can't manage that. You can't micromanage it. Ultimately, it's a market, and they're going to go where they feel like they can produce a service and, obviously earn a profit like any business. So those areas that I know we've been successful in the House and through your committee, let's talk about that. So there's a couple of bigger issues I think people don't always
That's
understand
right.
the mechanics.
Well, and I think you touched on really the key to the whole thing. We can't force insurance companies to stay here. And look, after the storms in 2020, 2021, probably had 800 to 900,000 claims filed. Insurance companies paid out almost $24 billion in losses. And I mean, let's face it, that'll cut into the bottom line. And it will take these insurance companies, many, many years of collecting premiums to reimburse those losses. Um, even if we don't have more catastrophic hurricanes. So um, maybe the most profound statement I've heard through this whole all the testimony we've heard is that when insurance companies stop taking your money, you've got a problem, and that's where we're at. I mean,
Yeah.
we've had approximately 12 companies essentially go bankrupt. Dozens of companies have completely pulled out of the state, and we've got a lot of companies still doing business here, but they're not writing new policies. And the only way we can ever potentially lower premiums is when customers have an opportunity to walk into that independent agent or to go to State Farm or Allstate and get a competitive quote. And if you've only got 2 or 3 carriers even writing business, the free market principle is out the window. There's no competition. There's no downward pressure on prices. So we've got to address the availability of insurance before we can even start considering lowering premiums and making insurance more affordable.
So let's talk a few of the bills that have gone through, whether the governor signed or they're on the Senate side. The ones that you point out to. I know Commissioner Temple had a strong plan, and we're working on a number of those bills. I'm sure a few things we came up on our own, but why don't you tell us about the important ones?
Yes. So the 4 bills that really were the foundation of the package. House Bill 120 by Representative Matthew Willard, who's actually a Democrat from New Orleans. And like this is obviously a bipartisan issue that impacts everybody. But that bill simply removed the sunset on the fortified home program, which just indicates our commitment to the fortified program. And look, we know that if we can build more resilient structures, if we can keep the roof on and keep rainfall out when a hurricane hits, it's going to minimize the severity of that loss, and it's going to make that structure, that home, more insurable and much more attractive to insurance companies. So, and we've also got a commitment to continue funding the fortified home program. So, long term, I think that's the biggest factor. Probably the most controversial of the reform package on property insurance was House Bill 611, which was my bill. And what it did is it will repeal the 3-year rule. So Louisiana's got this really archaic rule in place now in statute that says if you've been with your homeowner's insurance carrier 3 years or more, they cannot cancel you, they cannot non-renew you. On the surface, that sounds like a great deal, a very consumer-friendly measure, but we're the only place in the entire world that's got that rule, which should tell you something in itself. So the effect of the 3-year rule has been that companies cannot manage their risk. So if you can't strategically non-renew or can't cancel policies that, let's say, don't maintain the premises, if they don't take care of their roof, if they don't, if they're not willing to make sure trees are trimmed and not in danger of falling on the roofs, and there's a variety of reasons why insurance companies, like all businesses, should be able to identify risk and get away from that risk. Um, the only way with the 3-year rule in place that companies have been able to manage their risk is raise premiums. That's the only way.
Yeah.
And so, and we're phasing it out. We're not completely doing away with the 3-year rule immediately. So, beginning January 1st, companies will be able to non-renew up to 5% of their policies. And there are also some rules in place that would prevent that from uh, happening all in one zip code or all in one parish. So I really think the impact is going to be minimal when you look at the big picture um, to the consumer. But what it is going to do, and the reinsurers have identified this as a key factor in bringing them back into the state. So it's going to create an environment where companies can manage their risk and succeed. Um, Senate Bill 323 by Chairman Talbot, who chairs the Senate Insurance Committee. Again, Louisiana has a very convoluted uh, way of handling claims. So we've currently, actually, this has been signed into law. So prior to this law going into effect, we had two claims handling statutes that in some respects conflicted with one another. There really weren't clear expectations established in law in regards to when the companies are expected to inspect the loss after a claim's been filed. What's the expectation regarding claim payment? What happens when there's a dispute? And so, what Chairman Talbot's bill will do, it'll bring some clarity to those timelines. It sets clear expectations, and it also establishes a 60-day cure period. So if there is a dispute before filing a lawsuit, both sides have to get together and try to work things out and come to an agreement. So, and it also places a duty of good faith on the homeowner, which we do not have that now. So, just a real common sense piece of legislation that's going to bring us into alignment with other states. And the last piece of the package that has been signed into law, Senate Bill 295, Heather Cloud. Um, we've been referring to it as the file and use bill. So what it does is it will move us from a prior approval method of rate making, which is, again, it's real slow, and it prevents companies from getting new products to market in a timely manner. So we're moving from prior approval to change rates to file and use, which just says insurance companies can go ahead, file their proposed rate changes with the commissioner, but go ahead and start using them. So it just allows more flexibility and brings us in line with how Florida and Texas are handling things. So, and there's other legislation on the property side we could talk about, but one bill that's making its way through the process now, it just cleared House committee, should be heard on the House floor next week. Senate Bill 113, also by Senator Talbot, is it will bring some immediate rate relief to Citizens customers. And so there were concerns and some legitimacy, I think, to those concerns that by passing the 3-year rule, it would force some of those folks who are canceled into Citizens, who's the insurer of last resort, and that, of course, there's a 10% surcharge on Citizens. So, in statute, Citizens policies are required to be 10% higher than the next highest carrier in that market or in that particular parish. So what this bill does is it suspends that 10% surcharge. It brings it to zero for the coastal parishes, reduces it to 5% for the rest of the state. That will start January 1, 2025. That same date that the three-year rule repeal begins to go into effect. And so for a period of 3 years, coastal parishes will have a 0% surcharge, rest of the state 5%. So again, that's without question a very consumer-friendly measure that should alleviate some of the pain to the people who go to Citizens. And as part of a compromise, another piece of that bill is we will limit some liability for Citizens insurance. So it's kind of confusing, but we're not completely insulating Citizens from bad faith judgments, but we are limiting those judgments to policy limits plus reasonable attorney fees. So we're lessening Citizens liability in exchange for suspending this surcharge, which is a good compromise, and I think something that everybody's going to be very happy with.
I mean, I know you and Chairman Talbot on the Senate side have worked pretty hard on this going back to the beginning of the year and the new term. So it's exciting to hear about some of these things. I mean, I think if we could categorize what's happened as a result of all this work is, we talked about the reinsurance companies. Most of them are international, so that's a big part of it. They're watching some of the things that have been done, but it's certainly the normal national type insurance companies are watching as well. And I think what they see is Louisiana has adopted these 3 or 4 policies that have made us an outlier. Things like the 3-year rule or the whatever the case may be. And so they're seeing a governor sign off on some of these bills and the legislature passing and saying, okay, that's an environment that matches the other states that we've been comfortable operating in, right? So that's a good start. I mean, I know one of the things that I'm sure gets mixed up or you've dealt with more than I have, but just for the clarity of the interview is we had 2 committees that have dealt with insurance. You referenced this at the beginning. We've got the property part, which is what we're discussing. And then you also have a committee called Civil Law, chaired by another person. And we'll try to address that another day. But that deals more with the litigation part, right? And some of the things that I guess many would suggest cause some of the problems. So whether it's the regulations that we're talking about or the suits and the money involved, and certainly nobody here wants people to be deprived of getting their due if they've been wrong. But that's another part of this picture that we can address another day.
Right.
But I mean, unless there's some of that you think it's important to highlight in this conversation.
Well, also just very briefly, I will
Yeah.
mention, and you're correct that most of what we would call tort reform or legal reform would go through the Civil Law Committee. But we did have House Bill 337 by Chairman Jack McFarland. Direct action came through the House Insurance Committee, and it has passed both chambers and is sitting on the governor's desk. And such an important piece of legislation, especially for our commercial carriers, I think. And again, this is an area where Louisiana was one of only 3 states, I believe, that allow the insurance company to be sued in conjunction with the suit against the tortfeasor, against the person that's responsible for the accident. And so what Chairman McFarland's bill would do is simply say you can't enlist the insurance company on the suit, and you can't disclose to the jury that insurance is involved, because what we know is if the unfortunately if the jury knows they're suing the big bad insurance company, that leads to inflated judgments that's passed along to everybody.
Yes.
And that's how insurance works, when there's a nuclear verdict, we all pay for that in through increased premiums. So yeah, again, the tort reform we could talk another 30 minutes on, but
That'll be good.
we're making some progress there. And again, I think we would be remiss if we did not give credit to Commissioner Temple, and he has worked so hard. And his message all along has been, we've got to pass the entire package, and I think that applies to property, which we have. And again, no guarantees. Although we can guarantee that we're creating a more favorable environment to do business. Now, it's too early to tell whether or not that'll translate into lower premiums, but it would certainly bring some stability. But I think that same principle applies on the auto side. Man, it's so important to pass that whole package.
Yeah, agreed. And we, as I mentioned, I think we've got about a week left, really, although some people want to end it before that, but we'll see what happens with some of the bills. We're hopefully, we're waiting to see what'll happen on bills in the Senate, and then anything passed up to the governor's office. So stay tuned with what we've done. And I mean that literally as a legislature. But before we kick off or finish, anything you want to add to what we've discussed, or we kind of covered as much as we can?
I think we covered it all, and I'm very optimistic. I really am optimistic, and I think it's been a team effort. I think the delegation has worked to make this an important issue, and to bring to educate members. And the media, believe it or not, has construed some of what we're doing as strictly favorable to business. So for me, it would be very important to point out every piece of legislation we've passed has been pro consumers, and it's all about giving that consumer choice.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't get me wrong. There's bad actors in any kind of business at times, and perhaps that's why government's around to protect those rights and that market. But yeah, the idea is, businesses provide a service and they need to earn a profit, to stay in business or to grow. But at the end of the day, it's not about enriching. It's about taking
right.
care of our
Making you whole.
residents. Absolutely. Well,
Yep.
I know we're like I said, we're getting close to wrap up time adjournment. So I know you're probably waiting to go home and be with the family
I'll
for
be on my way as soon
extended
as we
period.
leave here.
Yeah. So thanks for all the hard work
Yeah.
on behalf of the
Thank you.
delegation, and hopefully we'll be able to report back, in the next couple of years about some real growth and
Yeah.
benefits. So,
I think so.
all
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, my man. I appreciate it. Yeah.